Welcome back to the Anti-Meta Club. This week we have a race C that is a Group 3 race. Now that means that we have lots of different cars that we can use. However, the Ford GT is of course meta, but there's another car, the Suzuki VGT, that is an absolute rocket on the straights. And since this track is mostly straights, except for the fun middle sector, that means the VGT is incredible. And I have good news and I have bad news. We're gonna start with the bad news. The VGT is so incredibly powerful that there's pretty much nothing else that can really touch it. The good news is it's incredibly difficult to drive, and there are actually very few people who can really get the most out of it, especially if you're not in the top split. And if you're in the top split, you probably don't need my advice and my guides as much. But anyways, let's get into it. The VGT and the Ford GT occupy the entirety of the top 10, and it's pretty clear to see that they are really dominating the leaderboard as we'd expect. I went ahead and set my first anti-meta time with the M6, but I kind of knew that I wasn't going to use it for the race because the race requires hard tires, and this car does not do well on hard tires. As we get to the bottom of the top 100, we're seeing that there are a lot of other cars available, which is always a good sign, but if we go back up a little bit, we'll see that Wind set the fastest time with the F-Type, and I was able to set a time almost that fast. The Jag has incredible power, a really high top speed, and surprisingly good handling. It also has really good tire wear, which I didn't expect for such a heavy car. This first braking zone is incredibly tough, and what's really important is getting a really good angle going into it. There are two corners on the barrier, and we want to hug both of them, but after the second one, we want to aim for this bend in the pit exit. We're going to be looking for the bollard right here that we're going to get as close to as we can, and then when we get to the yellow section of the barrier, we're then going to turn left sharply. As I turn in, I'm going to lift off the throttle just a little bit to use as much of the grass and curb as possible. Remember, you only need the outside tires on the curbing for it to count. Get back on the throttle to maximize all of the space that you possibly can and brake hard at the 100-meter board. We're going to hug that curb the entire way until we turn in. I want you to pay close attention to my steering inputs. I've talked about it in the past, but the ABS system in Gran Turismo is so incredibly powerful that you can still guide the car while 100% braking. We're going to wait until we get almost to the end of the barrier on the right, and then we're going to turn in sharply. And I want you to pay really close attention to when I turn in, I stop turning in and almost turn it back for just a brief second. The reason I'm doing this is to get the car to rotate. When the car starts sliding under heavy braking, if I continue to turn into the corner, then the front tires are going to slide, causing understeer. If I unwind the steering a little bit, I can find more grip with the front tires, and that means the rear tires will slide instead. After I've found that grip in the front tires, I'm able to turn in like normal and then exit the corner like normal, making sure we do not slide the rear tires as we exit because that will kill all our momentum, and this is a very important corner. Notice the line I'm taking through the tunnel. We want to just go as straight as possible. Aiming to put 2 tires on the curb, we're going to brake as soon as we get to the candy cane curb and then turn right before the very end of it. I understeered a little bit here, so we could definitely find a little bit more time and you'd be able to get on the throttle a lot cleaner than I did. This little bit of curbing on the bridge rail can grab onto your car and make it rotate all the way to the left. You want to avoid that. At the end of the red and white curb is when we're going to start to turn in. You're going to notice that the car is probably going to understeer a little bit depending on how fast you go, so you want to lift off on the throttle just enough to get the front tires to start gripping again. Now this corner starts going uphill, but then it flattens out at the top, which means if you get on the throttle too sharply, you're going to understeer, and there's a wall on the outside that we want to avoid. Don't stop turning until you're fully on the throttle to make sure that you're not going to hit that wall, but as soon as you're clear, go straight over the grass. You're going to turn left just slightly so you can get a wide angle and a late apex on this corner, making sure you avoid going over that white line because you will get a penalty. Brake as soon as you get to the tunnel and aim for that chevron at the end directly ahead. Quickly get down to second gear and turn in right before the end of the tunnel. I like to use first gear like always just to rotate, but then back up to second gear before getting back on the throttle. It's very easy to understeer by getting on the throttle too quickly or using too much throttle here, so be very careful. Use as much of the curbing here as possible, and at the end of the curbing is when we're going to downshift again and turn in. Once you turn in, we're going to trail brake and continue turning in to make sure that we can get a good approach for the next corner. I like to avoid these bumps as much as possible, but if your car is already leaning to the left, there's not going to be a lot of weight over them, and they might not make your car do too much, but they can still be dangerous, so it's best to avoid them. Patience is key when it comes to consecutive S-corners like this, but with this dark patch on the ground to the right, you can just try to make sure you position your car on top of that before turning in. When I lift off the throttle, I like to upshift at that point to make sure it's just pure acceleration to the next corner. Also note for these last two corners, I'm on this green part between the grass and the red and white curbing. If you get a bad angle coming into this final corner, you may have to lift off the throttle so your front tires don't lift off at that crest. This 50-meter board on the left is your braking point. We're going to brake hard and immediately trail brake in, getting to second gear as fast as we can. Again, I like to use first gear to rotate. It's not always necessary depending on how quickly you decelerated, but it's never really a bad option. Back up to second gear for the exit and make sure you don't touch the grass because it will slow you down a lot. I ended up getting a 0.48 with the Jag, which I felt pretty good with, so let's go over it in full speed now. Starting out all the way on the left, we're going to start turning in when we see the first corner on the guardrail right here. Once we get to the second corner, we're going to aim for the exit of the pits and then try to get close to this bollard, turning left at the yellow mark on that barrier. We brake hard at the 100, turn into the 50 using a lot of brake, and we're going to counter steer if your car rotates. If it doesn't start sliding and rotating, that's okay. We just want to make sure that we get solidly on the throttle here without sliding the tires. We're going to try to turn as little as possible so we don't slow the car down unnecessarily, and we're going to look for the curbing on the left. Brake as soon as we get onto it, turn before we get to the end of it, and we want to clip that apex, obviously. I missed it slightly. Avoid that bridge. We're going to turn in, lift off the throttle, get on the throttle gently here so when the crest hits, we don't fly into that wall. Braking as soon as we get into the tunnel, downshift, rotate, throttle gently, and try to exit as close to this wall as possible. When we turn in, we're going to continue turning in so we hit late apexes on each of these corners here. Your car may lift up into the air if you hit this at the wrong angle, so be careful. Don't be afraid to lift. Brake hard at the 50, turn in and trail brake, clip the apex, get on the throttle solidly without sliding, and there you go. Like always, I've uploaded the replay so you can watch it with whatever view you use, and up next, we're going to go over a race where I got second place from the back in EMEA. I had tested about 8 different cars on my Monday stream when we were racing from the back, and it wasn't until much later that night that I realized I wanted to use the Jag as my anti-meta car. Because of how late it was, when I jumped into my main account, I had a very, very rough race from the back, and despite getting rammed multiple times by multiple people, I was still in the lead with about half the race left to go. I wasn't able to showcase the strengths of the Jag whatsoever, so I decided to jump in my British account. Now, EMEA is the strongest region by far, and on top of that, it was late morning over there, so a lot more people were driving. That meant there were a lot of fast drivers that were driving too. The first race I did, however, was really rough still, and I might actually upload that race later with some commentary because it was pretty crazy, but this was a very fun race, and I was really proud of my result considering the people that were in the lobby. Both the guy directly ahead of me and behind me were in the race I did previously, and they were both very quick, so I knew if there were fast drivers all the way at the back, then I was going to have my work cut out for me, and I also knew there would be a really good chance to show off what the Jag could really do in this race. This corner is scary enough by its own, but whenever we're with a big pack, I always go really wide to make sure that if there's any kind of accordion effect going on, or if people are going to crash or something like that, I'm not going to be part of it. Bumpy was much more aggressive, and he made a really, really good move right there. Despite losing that one position, we actually gained 2 others, so we were doing pretty good. One of the reasons I chose the Jag was because it has a lot of power, and when it's in the slipstream behind a car, it can get up to nearly 170 miles per hour. I wanted to stay wide to avoid any collisions and take advantage of anyone who did get in an accident, but then I got hit a little bit by that Suzuki. It looked like he lifted afterwards, though. It was definitely a mistake, and then we were back into it. I figured I should try to stay wide in case the Suzuki would try to do anything crazy, and he did make a mistake, which ended his race right then and there. I decided to just hold back and not try to do anything aggressive until more space opened up. Gaining 1 more position from a spun car, I wanted to just stay as close to the Beetle as possible, planning on just getting behind him, using the slipstream to possibly pass him on the next straight. I also noticed that Nikolai had a half-second penalty, so I was certain I was going to be able to take him on the penalty zone. I was a little bit worried when I saw that Porsche go in the grass, and despite it taking him a few attempts to get the car straightened back out, and the car in front moving back and forth to try to get rid of him in the slipstream, we all ended up just proceeding onward to the next corner. Another reason that I really like the Jag is the stability. This corner is really crazy with how much it messes with the weight transfer of the car going into this heavy braking zone. I was able to give this guy enough space, maintain my speed, and then of course I took this outside line. We had some collisions and that slowed everyone else down, so I was able to pass both of these cars coming out of that corner. The good exit we got from that hairpin really paid off because there was another car that had to serve a penalty, and we were close enough to Bumpy that he couldn't sneak in there. I did try to sneak past Bumpy, but ended up just hitting him for a little bit of a bump draft, and unfortunately he completely missed his brake zone right there. I tried to turn in to avoid Ettman, but Ettman turned a little bit too much. We collided, but it didn't seem to ruin either of our lines. We're now up to 8th place, and judging from the last race as well as my pace in the Jag, I was pretty certain I was going to be safe through here. I just had to keep it clean through this really twisty section, and then on the straight I was sure the Z4 wouldn't be able to catch me. At this point I was really happy that I was able to put such a gap between myself and the Z4, because that meant that he was going to have to deal with the people trying to attack, and I wasn't going to have to deal with him trying to attack, leading to this really important straight. The slipstream effect, however, is very powerful, and if the person behind you is within 1 second of you, then they're going to have a lot of extra speed because of the hole that you're punching through the air. Another showcase of how good the Jag is, I don't have anyone in front of me to punch a hole through the air for that slipstream effect, but the Z4 is directly behind me and benefiting from the slipstream of my car. Despite that, I've actually gained ground on him since the beginning of the straight. By the time I hit the brakes, we had almost gained an entire 10th on the Z4, who again had the benefit of my slipstream when I had nothing. That luckily only increased after the corner, and now we were only 3.3 seconds behind Blackstar ahead. I had been paying really close attention to the delta between myself and Bumpy, and I was really comforted by the fact that even on the long straights, he wasn't able to catch up to me. So it was time for me to just put my head down, drive as well as I possibly could, doing what I could not to destroy the tires, to keep a really good pace, keep a good rhythm through this middle section, and try to catch up to Blackstar. If you take a look at the fastest lap, that's Jack Balding in the Suzuki, an overpowered driver in an overpowered car. The man hit a 24.6 in the race with no slipstream, which means that he was only 2/10 off of the qualifying time that I hit with this car in the race with fuel and tire wear. That is the true power of the Suzuki BGT, which means that it is almost insurmountable, but we're still going to do the very best that we can. Please ignore the fact that I completely missed that apex. Sometimes I'm allergic to them. At this point on the last lap, we were about a half second ahead of Bumpy. Now we're 9/10, and even though he still has that slipstream effect from being directly behind me, the further you are away, the less powerful it is. We're also now less than 3 seconds behind Blackstar, who was 3.3 or 3.4 here on the last lap. I had realized just about here that Blackstar's in the exact same car I was in, so it was going to be completely up to my driving, not the car, to make sure that I could actually catch him. Jumping forward to the next lap, now we're 1.3 seconds ahead of Bumpy and 2.3 behind Blackstar. It didn't make a lot of sense right then and there to go in the pits, though the Jag could stand 10 laps on the mediums. It's surprisingly good for a heavy car. But I decided to stay out that one extra lap to take the normal strategy that I do, which is 5 laps on the hards and then 9 on mediums. Fast forwarding once again, we had cut out about 2/10, maybe a little bit more from Blackstar, and we were going to go in the pits no matter what. Now he didn't go into the pits. He was either going to take one more lap on the hards, or he was on the mediums and he was going to do a few more laps. I wasn't sure, so we were just going to stick to our plan anyways. At this point, no matter what strategy the people behind me were on, we were going to be ahead of them because we were on the worst tires and we were going to get on the good tires after this pit stop. So I was pretty sure that I had 7th in the bag at least. Now, pitting this early with people behind you not pitting can cause problems. It either means that you passed them when they were on faster tires but not performing as well, or they're on the same tires and just a different strat and you're already proving yourself to be faster than them anyways. And after we saw that first hairpin, I was pretty sure I knew the answer there. In the super dirty race that I mentioned earlier, this guy ahead of me actually caused a very, very big accident previously. He apologized. I'm pretty sure he didn't mean to do it. It was just sloppy. But because of that, I was a little bit apprehensive and I was thinking too much and made a big mistake trying to pass him. I braked way too late. He was able to unpass himself, and now I had hurt my tires. I was going to waste my brand new good tires on trying to follow him through this section, so I wasn't super confident in what our result was going to be. I decided to mitigate the damage by just being easy on the tires and just trying to stay behind him until the straight. I knew that the Jag was more than capable of passing him on the straight, so as long as I stayed calm here, we could potentially just save the tires a little bit and then make a really easy move going into the next section. With that said, however, in the previous race, this is exactly what caused the disaster. I was behind him in this same place. I'd used the Jag power to get ahead of him, and he didn't know where he was going to go and decided to go straight into me in the braking zone. I was really hoping, since he apologized, most people who feel bad about making a move and making a mistake don't make that same mistake again, so I was really banking on that. I noticed Blackstar was just coming out of the pits, so we made the undercut work on him. And despite the fact that he would then have tires that were one lap newer, I was pretty confident that with the slipstream here, we were going to be able to make a move on him pretty quickly. I was also very happy to note that the Corvette driver had just lifted going into that last corner. Like I said, people who apologize for big mistakes generally don't make that big mistake again, and I was very glad I was right about that. I had also considered my mistake trying to pass him on that last lap, and so I made sure to brake with ample time, knowing that I had some overspeed from being in Blackstar's slipstream, and that worked out really nice because he actually missed his corner. A big topic of conversation in the Gran Turismo community these last couple of weeks has been the dirty air. It's been incredibly difficult to follow behind cars in downforce cars, any cars that feature any kind of amount of downforce. Group 3 was pretty bad, Super Formula was really bad, and last week with the Super Formula races, they had turned the slipstream effect onto weak, and we had thought that that might be the reason that we were able to follow more closely. But this week, it's set to real, and we're still able to follow, so it appears that Gran Turismo did something behind the scenes, that PD has made some kind of change to it, and it is a very, very welcome change. Now, using the overspeed that I had from being in his slipstream for so long, I was going to try to pass him on the inside here, but he had it covered, so I just gave him a little bit of a bump so we can keep up our momentum. Turning in, he kept an inside line to defend, and I was going to try a nice over-under, but he was way too good for that. He covered the inside. I bumped him a little bit, but he left me a lot of space, and so it ended up just being really fun, good, clean racing. I absolutely love stuff like that, because we made contact, obviously, multiple times, but it didn't affect either of us whatsoever. We weren't slowing down because of that, and so we were both able to remain friendly with each other, and this is exactly the kind of racing I love. I was able to pull off this inside move, stuck to the apex, get a good exit, and I was able to stay all the way in front of him. The thing you know about cleaner drivers like that, and especially since I'd been following them for so long, is that they're usually also pretty quickly, so again, I had to just keep my head down and drive as cleanly as I possibly can. There was no one close to us in front, so I wasn't going to have any slipstream. He was going to have the slipstream on me, which meant that I was going to be at a disadvantage when it came to the next corner after the straight. So I was just going to do as well as I possibly could to put as much of a gap between us before then. I was just barely able to get next to him by the end of the straight on the last lap, and I was 2 tenths behind him. He was 4 tenths, and I got a better exit, so I was pretty confident that if I were just to break the slipstream with one quick move, then I'd be safe leading into the next corner. Feeling pretty safe with Blackstar now far enough behind me that I didn't think he'd be able to even make a move here, I was then looking ahead to Naked Ape. He was 2.7 seconds ahead of me, and I wasn't quite sure what his strategy was. I didn't know if he had to pit, if he had just pit, because I wasn't paying any attention, unfortunately. So again, I just kept my head down, and I wanted to drive as fast as I possibly could. I was really happy that Blackstar was still more than 4 tenths behind me. I made one more move to try to break the slip a little bit without actually weaving. Just one move. Thank you very much. If you weave, that's weak. And now again, like I keep saying, I'm just going to try to focus on driving as well as I possibly can. Now this is where our strategy is going to start paying off. By starting on the hards and getting our pit stop out of the way early, we're able to have mostly clean air and just run laps not impeded by other drivers for a really long time. The hope in this strategy is the people who started on the softer compound, the mediums, would have been battling each other up ahead and didn't have as much time and as much freedom to just set laps while we were in the back setting really clean laps. If I was able to set a much cleaner pace with all of that clean air I had, then when these people went in the pits, we would pass them while they were actually in the pits, and we wouldn't have to battle them whatsoever. Rory wasn't able to get in the pits until just about when we came out of that last corner, so we knew we'd have him. We also had second and third place going in the pits, but Naked Ape was staying out. So we knew that we were going to have at least a couple positions, and by the end of the pit straight, we had gained 2 positions. This is when I started getting really excited. Everyone who wasn't Jack was now directly in front of me. All 3 of these guys were most definitely going to battle. With only 4 laps left in the race, there was pretty much no way that they were just going to let each other do their own thing and just drive in a line. I wasn't sure what tires Naked Ape was on, but I knew that Lucent Racing and Peel Speed were both most likely on the harder compound because they had just come out of the pits. I had talked about how good the Jag was on tires before. I can do mid-25s throughout the entirety of my medium compound stint. The fastest lap I was able to do with the Jag on hard tires was a 25.8, so I was absolutely certain that I was going to be faster than at least 2 of these guys. So this is where you have to be really careful. If you know you're going to be faster than at least a couple of the people in a group ahead of you, then you've got to make some really good decisions. If you're too close and they collide or make a big mistake, you can get collected in that pretty easily. I wasn't quite careful enough, and I did give Peel Speed a bit of a bump. Now, I don't know if he ended up missing his braking here because of that, or because he just missed it in general, but either way, we were all in the exact same position we were before that corner, so I figured no harm, no foul. I figured I would still just continue going about my business, trying to make a move whenever I could, and I really didn't think he was going to be too upset about that. I'm not sure if he was trying to just let me on the inside because he didn't want to put too much of a fight, or if he was trying to maintain the slipstream behind Lucent Racing, but either way, I was able to get all the way in front of him going into this corner. It hadn't quite hit me that the cars in front of me were an Evo and a WRX, and I had tested both of those cars previously. The Evo has a lot of potential. I think the WRX does too, but what neither of them have is the ability to fend off a Jag that's in their slipstream. At this point, I was pretty sure that Naked Ape was on the exact same tire strategy that I was, but Lucent was not. Also, I don't know if I'm saying Lucent's name correctly, so I'm sorry if I'm not. But either way, we got ahead of him, and then we only had 1 more position between me and second place. The WRX is definitely a bit more nimble than the Jag, so I was really hoping I could just stay within that magic 1 second delta so I could get the slipstream from him on that big straight, because I knew I'd be able to catch him if I was able to do that. And I was very pleasantly surprised that I was able to stick with him and actually get closer to him by the time that we got to that straight. Now, one thing to consider was, even if I did pass him on this straight, then he might be able to outbrake me going into the next corner. But even if he did do that, there's 1 more straight, which really means that a power car here is incredibly powerful. Now, he got a really good exit from that last corner. I was gaining on him, but not quite as much as I expected. I thought I'd actually be side by side or even ahead of him by now. So I was just going to play it cool, not try to be too aggressive going into this corner. So like I always do in hairpins, I went as wide and as deep as possible, focusing on nothing but the exit. So even if he got a better exit than me, the power of the Jag was going to mean that I was going to get ahead of him by the next corner. Now, if I were to move to the side immediately, he might try to cover that, so I waited, stayed behind him, and then moved to the side all in 1 really quick move. I was able to get right next to him, and I knew if I didn't overshoot this corner, I was going to be able to take the position. I braked just in time, was able to tuck it into the corner just well enough, and I actually had a considerable gap on him and felt pretty good about that. I was pretty sure I was going to have to fight him off on these next corners, but I surprised myself by being able to lose him pretty quickly through the twisty section. Even though he had been able to get really good exits coming out of the corners going onto the straights, I figured, just like with the Z4 at the beginning of the race, if I was able to get a good exit as well, he wasn't going to be able to catch up to me, let alone pass me on the straight. Once I got onto the straight itself, I pretty much knew that I had solidified my position. Now take a look at where Jack is. Jack is, like I keep saying, a very, very good driver in a very, very good car. He also started on pole position and had to deal with absolutely no one the entire race, so the man's a solid 15 seconds ahead of me. With only 1 lap after this, there was no way I was going to come even close to him, even if he crashed, so second place is where I was going to finish. Right there shows why the Jag is my anti-meta car of the week. I was now 4.2 seconds ahead of Naked Ape. We had started second to last, been through a lot in this race, and we were finishing in second place to an incredible driver in an incredible car. With multiple Mercs an Evo, WRX, Z4, a Ford GT, a Porsche behind me, I think that really shows how good of a car the Jag is. Thank you once again for joining me and watching my anti-meta guide. I hope it helped you out. If you like what you saw, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. I will be making a video every single week as long as there is a meta car to battle. I call it the anti-meta meta club, kind of like the anti-social social club, but it's also so we can find the meta anti-meta car. And hopefully we'll be able to find a meta fighter every single week. Thank you again.